Ancient Roman women, like any women, loved to dress up. Roman fashion over the centuries changed many times, new fabrics, patterns and styles appeared. Roman emperors tried to use laws against luxury to discourage women who spent fortunes on clothes and jewelry, but nothing worked. At first clothes were made almost exclusively of wool or leather, then came linen, and with the development of trade from the East silk began to arrive. In late antiquity they were able to make very thin, translucent fabrics. We know their names: linen, sindon, amorgine and others. It was the same with colors. In the harsh republican times, when Rome was small and money was scarce, people wore mostly light wool clothes, except for a border they could dye. But the further on, the more often bright colors were used. Known as the Kos silk, silk that was made from Chinese raw materials on the island of Kos and was dyed in the color of the sea wave. The basis of women's costume was the tunic, a sort of long simple shirt, with or without sleeves. They wore it at home, and it was as indecent to show oneself outside in a tunic as in a bathrobe today. At first, the cut of the tunic was the most basic. A piece of cloth was folded in half and a hole was cut into it for the head and the sides were sewed up. The whole construction was girt and the length was adjusted by simply letting out the extra fabric over the belt. Then tunics with full sleeves and shoulder line began to appear. On the tunic was put on the full dress, table. If the tunic had long sleeves, the table could be sleeveless and looked about like a sarafan. If the tunic was sleeveless, the table was sleeved. It was in ancient Rome that sleeves with clasps were invented. It seems decent and the hands are closed, but it looks seductive. The stola was belted under the chest, above the waist. Tables were clothes of free Roman citizens, neither slaves, nor freedmen wore such clothes. Tables could be embroidered with gold threads and were almost always decorated with ornaments. The favorite ornaments of Roman women were fairly simple: stylized leaves, rhombuses, and squares. The table could be anything depending on the fashion. It was belted, decorated with frills, pearls, or embroidery. Seneca wrote, "Matrons should not wear cloths of the colors worn by saleswomen," so in his time matrons at all times tried to put on not a strict white cloth with a little purple border at the hem, and something colorful and bright. And the corrupt women had their fun as best they could. The outer garment for men and women at first was a toga, just a piece of woolen cloth, which was wrapped around them as best they could. Then the toga became the men's official clothes, like our business suit, and every wrinkle in it was regulated. And the palla became the women's garment. A palla is essentially a modern stole, a wide, long cloak that could be wrapped around you in many different ways. There were short capes with something like a hood, and there were thick woolen cape coats, panoles. Tunics and tables, however, are still traditional costume and lasted until about the time of the first Caesars. In late Roman times, the most fashionable type of dress was the dalmatic, a loose tunic with wide sleeves. Dalmatic was first mentioned in the 4th century AD, and already in Byzantium it became the most common type of dress for men and women. Of course, Roman women wore jewelry. Jewelry, too, did not change much. These were earrings, bracelets, beads, sometimes graceful, sometimes rude. In later times, they could wear several rings on one finger or several earrings in the ear. Even then, the most popular were rings and bracelets in the form of snakes. Hair ornaments were especially common. The fashion for hairstyles in Rome was changing rapidly and new kinds of hairpins and tiaras were needed. In traditional Republican Rome matrons were forbidden to dye their hair, but the farther this prohibition was observed, the less. And now for the most intimate of all. Ancient Roman women knew very well what underwear was, and underneath it all, that is, under the palla, stola and tunic, or dalmatica, they wore bandages on their hips and breasts. Judging by the numerous images of girls engaged in this kind of sport, these bandages were quite comfortable and did not differ much from modern swimwear in appearance.